On Saturday, the Russian army once again shelled the border areas of the Chernigov region, using artillery and mortars. According to Ukrinform, this was reported on Facebook by the Sever Operational Command. So, according to the command, from 11:35 to 12:35 in the Senkovka area, 7 hits were recorded, presumably from a 120 mm mortar, and 15, in all likelihood, from cannon artillery. From 12:30 to 13:30, information was received about 9 hits, probably from cannon artillery, in the Gasachivka area. It is reported that there are no losses among personnel and equipment as a result of enemy shelling. Information about losses among the local population or damage to civilian infrastructure is being specified. As Ukrinform reported, on October 13th, the enemy shelled the Semenovskaya embankment in the Chernigov region. The invaders used mortars to strike. The fire was fired from the direction of the Russian village of Lomakovka. On October 14th, a column of Russian vehicles proceeded through Mariupol to Rozovka, in the area where enemy forces were gathering. Advisor to the mayor of Mariupol Petro Andriashenko announced this on Telegram, Ukrinform reports. The column of equipment for yesterday didn't ship until fully tracked. The equipment arrived from Novozovsk and through the city, to Rozovka. According to our information from the spot, they are now gathering forces in Rozovka and the surrounding villages. There is a large cluster in Slatkovodny. They settled there at the school and try to put the equipment closer to home. Mostly Kadyrovites, but there were also many mobile phones, Andriashenko said. He added that the invaders will not rest. As reported, in Mariupol, the so-called MGB-DPR catches a fictitious sabotage group, Azov, against this background, arranging total checks of civilians in the city. The Russian army is equipped with obsolete weapons, in particular, the S-60 anti-aircraft guns, developed back in the 1940s, are being sent to the front. According to Ukrinform, this was reported by the Department of Strategic Communications of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in Telegram. Another portion of prehistoric shit that the Katsaps are dragging to the front. These are S-60 anti-aircraft guns developed in the 40s of the last century, the directorate said, posting the corresponding video. Western sanctions have reportedly severely curtailed Russia's ability to produce arms and ammunition, forcing the Kremlin to instruct its intelligence agencies to find ways to get around the restrictions and acquire chips and critical technology. Russia has lost more than 6,000 pieces of equipment in almost 8 months since the start of a full-scale war against Ukraine. In the morning, Konstantinovka suffered the most from Russian shelling in the Donetsk region. According to Ukrinform, this was announced by the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration Pavlo Kirilenko on Telegram. Most of all this morning, Konstantinovka suffered from Russian shelling. Outbuildings of the enterprise and the former outpatient clinic building were damaged in the city. Also, on the territory of the village of Alexandro Shultino, a house was shelled by cluster shells. Fortunately, there were no casualties, the message says. The day before, according to Kirilenko, Fedorovka and the village of Soldar were also shelled, where 2 people were injured. As reported, according to the Donetsk OVA, on October 14th, as a result of shelling from the Russian side, 2 residents of Bakhmut were killed. In addition, 6 more civilians were found in Lyman, who were killed by the Russians during the occupation. On Friday, 6 more people were injured. At present, it is impossible to establish the exact number of victims in Mariupol and Volnovakha. There is more and more talk in Russia about negotiations, but there is a complete consolidation of Ukrainian society and the consolidation of the West, so there is no need to sit down at the negotiating table with Putin now. This was stated by the director of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future Vadim Denisenko at the joint telethon United News, Ukrinform reports. Recently, we have heard a lot from Putin and his entourage about the need for a negotiation process. In fact, Putin is looking for any excuse to have a point for negotiations. It is from this point of view that the visit of the head of the UAE and his meeting with Putin should be viewed. From this point of view, Putin's frightening statements that the grain corridor may stop working should also be considered, and it is from this point of view that the statement that the Russian Federation was not going to destroy anything in Ukraine. These are actually stories with which the outside world began to sit down at the negotiating table, Denisenko said. According to the expert, with regard to negotiations, Putin is taking small steps so that they begin to agree on something with him, and then he will gradually involve the world in his negotiation processes. It is very important that now the collective West does not stop. There are US statements after the terrible shelling of Ukraine that they will continue to supply us with weapons. And they believe that it is impossible to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine. The Russians understand that they have nothing concrete and serious after these. Actually, there are no attacks, they didn't achieve it, Denisenko said. He notes that now there is a complete consolidation of Ukrainian society and the consolidation of the West, which suggests that now there is no need to sit down at the negotiating table with Putin. And now there is not even a subject for negotiations. As Ukrinform reported, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine is ready for a dialogue with the Russian Federation, but with another Russian president, because the current does not know what dignity and honesty are. At the same time, Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of the president's office, believes that the resumption of negotiations with Russia is possible only when its army leaves the territory of Ukraine, including Crimea. In Ukraine, as a result of the armed aggression of the Russian Federation during the day, October 14, 11 people were killed, 11 more were injured. Head of the office of the President Kirilo Tymoshenko announced this on Telegram, citing data from regional military departments, Ukrinform reports. Consequences of the armed anger of the Russian Federation. Losses among the civilian population, 11 people were killed, 11 people were injured, he said. Tymoshenko noted that 2 people were injured in the Dnipropetrovsk region. In the Donetsk region, 8 people were killed, including 6 killed earlier, 6 more were injured. In the Zaporozhye region, 2 people were killed, 1 person was injured. In the Kharkiv region, 1 person died, another was injured. 1 person was injured in the Kherson region. As Ukrinform reported, on October 13, the Russian military killed 8 civilians in Ukraine, and another 26 were injured. In the Russian Federation, mobilization is being softened due to urgent conscription and dissatisfaction with it in society. This was stated by the director of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future Vadim Denisenko at the joint telethon United News, Ukrinform reports. As for the mobilization in Russia, the planned call of conscripts is now beginning. It became simply impossible to carry out the previously announced mobilization. Therefore, they announced the end of mobilization, Denisenko stressed. He also drew attention to the fact that a big riot of so-called war correspondents, who control the segment of the Telegram channel, has begun in the Russian Federation. Starting with the Kharkov breakthrough, Russian war correspondents who control a huge information segment declared their subjectivity and began to criticize Putin's direction. Even the Public Opinion Foundation, the Kremlin State Sociological Center, shows for the 3rd week in a row that the rating of trust in the authorities and Putin is falling. And the main reason here is mobilization. Therefore, from this point of view, it was decided to somewhat soften the situation with mobilization, Denisenko said. The expert said that, according to the same war correspondents, at least 500,000 Russians received summonses. It is obvious that now it is necessary to process these people, to resettle them somewhere and, therefore, to suspend the announced mobilization. As Ukrinform reported, on October 14, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that 222,000 people have already been called up, are in formation units, 33,000 of them are already in units, and 16,000 are already performing combat missions. According to him, the mobilization will be completed within 2 weeks. On September 21, Putin announced mobilization in Russia, and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced that 300,000 reservists would be called up as part of a partial mobilization. The first echelons with the Russian military, which are part of the regional group of troops, arrived in Belarus. According to Ukrinform, the Ministry of Defense of Belarus reports this on its Telegram channel. The first echelons with Russian servicemen who are part of the regional group of forces arrived in the Republic of Belarus, the message says. The exact number of soldiers is not specified. That this week the self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, said that Belarus and Russia had begun the deployment of a regional grouping of the Union State. He said that thousands of Russian soldiers were to arrive in Belarus. Lukashenko substantiated the deployment of the regional grouping by the alleged prepared attack by Ukraine and NATO countries. According to him, it will include 70,000 Belarusian servicemen, but it is not yet clear with the size of the Russian contingent. Lukashenko said that he would not demand 10 to 15,000 people from the Russian Federation. As Ukrinform reported, the European Union called on Belarus to stop allowing its own territory to be used as a launch pad for Russian missiles and warns against creating a Russian-Belarusian group of troops, since such a move by the Belarusian regime is aimed at escalating aggression and will not go unanswered by the EU.